I remember the call like the smell of smoke after a storm. Sharp, metallic, impossible to ignore. The dispatcher's voice came through my radio with that flat, professional cadence that never lets emotion leak in. Seconds later, I was on the engine, lights screaming, tires biting the asphalt, the crew moving like trained shadows because every second matters and we all know it deep in our bones. We turned down the quiet cul-de-sac where the houses sat like small, carefully tended secrets. Someone had parked a pickup wrong. The lane was just a little tight, and I could feel the weight of it. We eased forward, sirens low now because the street was lined with elderly neighbors and sleeping dogs. That's when I saw her, Karen from the Homeowners Association, hand on her hip, a cell phone glowing in her fist like a talisman. She had the exact expression of someone who belongs to rules and enjoys them. "Blocked access?" she called, as if the engine could answer. "You can't park there." "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm though my heartbeat had already learned how to sprint. "We have an active structure fire. Please move your vehicle." She put a finger under her chin in that slow, knowing way and said, "This is HOA property. You need permission to access this section. There are rules." Behind her, a plume of smoke had not yet risen. We didn't know the fire location for sure. The call said possible structure fire, address unclear, reports coming from panicked neighbors. We needed to get the truck as close as possible, deploy lines and start looking. Every second buys someone time. Permission isn't the issue. "We need space to work," I said. "If you don't move, we can't get near the houses." She sniffed. "I'm telling you no. OA rules. Fine, go find another way." She stepped aside just enough to let the tail of the ladder truck pass, but the front end of the engine couldn't swing in the tight spot because another car was wedged at the curb. Her eyes flicked to it and then back to me, like she was tallying infractions. We tried to squeeze past. The truck groaned like an animal, and we heard the distinct thump of one side scraping a mailbox. The neighbor across the street opened his door and shouted, "What's going on?" "There's a fire," I answered, and wished for the radio to deliver coordinates like a miracle. We climbed down and started to fan out on foot, hoses slung, axes in hand. The street was a chorus of confusion, a child screaming, a dog barking, the crinkle of someone dragging a hose from a backyard. Then from the corner of my eye, I saw it. Curtains like blackened flags in a second-floor window, and a faint glimmer of orange, as if someone had tucked a tiny sun inside the living room. "Second house on the left," I called. "Second story, get ladders." We moved as if the world had narrowed to that single house and the people inside it. The homeowner had stumbled onto the lawn, eyes wide and smeared with smoke, words tumbling out in a language of panic that didn't need grammar. We ushered him back, put masks on, and then the job turned into the job and nothing else. Somewhere in the chaos, Karen had found a way to wedge her minivan so that the gurney unit couldn't get through. She stood in the road as if the world had presented her the final word. "You're obstructing traffic," she said, color climbing into her cheeks the way perfume climbs a room. "Do you have a permit to block my street?" "Move it," one of my crew said, sharper now. "We need to get these lines laid." She dug in and started talking about covenants, about fines, about the association's right to protect property values. She waved a folder of laminated papers like a shield. People were yelling at her, neighbors with their faces streaked in worry and ash. But she repeated her mantra with the steady conviction of someone reading from a script she believed had been handed down from the gods of order. We worked around her, because what else could we do? We can't stop to argue when someone's roof is caving in. We climbed the ladder, glass exploding like some crystalline hail as the heat found its way out. A shout from below, someone trapped but alive on the balcony, made my blood go tight and precise. We hauled a woman down, coughing, hair singed in places, eyes enormous with a gratitude so raw it hurt. The house surrendered its smoke and then, later, its smoldering secrets. We doused what we could. The neighbors' kids watched, mouths slack. Someone wrapped a blanket around the rescued woman, and the street exhaled. Then came the other sound, a different alarm, an outraged chorus. A woman, red-faced and outraged, had surrounded the scene with neighbors pointing. It was Karen again, throwing her voice like a hand grenade, telling us that we had damaged her property with our hoses, trampling her flower beds, shampooing the soil with ash. "You people," she cried, directing each syllable at us, "you have no right to ruin landscaping without prior notice." I wiped ash off my forehead and found that my patience had become something thin and brittle. "Ma'am, a house caught fire. People could have died." Her response was that same neat separating thing. "Not my problem if your crew can't follow rules." For a second, the absurdity of it, The way someone could prioritize a mulch triangle over a life flooded me. Then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a small slip of smoke rising from behind Karen's curtains, a whisper at first, barely more than a thought, but then the smell, unmistakable, the smell of something burning close by. "Is that?" someone asked. She opened the front door with a flourish and a look of offended authority. The house behind her, the very house she had insisted was the territory of HOA rules and boundaries, had a thin thread of smoke trailing from its eaves. The siding near the back door had started to blacken. A small electrical fire, we later learned, had started in the kitchen and tried to become something more. It waited with the patience of ignition. Her face, for the first time that evening, lost its combed neatness. "What? That's nothing," she said, though the word had the wobble of someone clinging to a script that's fraying. "Call 911, I said, but she was frozen, paralyzed by the sudden reversal of the world. Here she was, the woman who had blocked our access, and now she was the neighbor in need. People like Karen often live in a geometric world where rules explain everything. Chaos is a rude guest that doesn't follow the guest list. She had insisted on a perimeter and an order, and now the one thing she had controlled had become vulnerable. After the first responders contained the immediate hazards, the irony had not left the air. There were neighbors who refused to let the memory of her blocking us go. They replayed it like a favorite scene. The minivan, the folder, the jewel of smug certainty. They talked about fines and about civic duty and about how rules were for everyone, except for the part where compassion should have trumped paperwork in that moment. I don't like to gloat. We don't in this work. But I did watch as she stood on her porch while we hose swept her yard and coaxed away the ash that had landed like ill-timed confetti. She opened her mouth to lecture and then closed it when the rescued woman, the one from the second house, came over on shaky legs and said, "Thank you." The words landed like stones into the neat garden of her composure. There were consequences beyond embarrassment. The HOA had a hearing. People wrote statements. The records are dry and legal, and they will not fit the heat of that night inside their margins. But they provide a kind of arithmetic justice. She was fined for obstructing emergency vehicles, and the association applied a community service agreement that read like a public penance. For 1 month, she had to attend community safety meetings and help to coordinate neighborhood emergency drills. She came to the first meeting like a soldier to parole, eyes scanning the room for an exit. I watched her wrestle with the new role. She had to listen to fire marshals talk about response times and the physics of smoke, to neighbors speak about evacuation plans, to people tell their stories of being rescued. The sound of her learning was small and jagged at first. But over time, she began to hold it less like a weapon and more like a ledger entry. One afternoon, weeks after the fire, I found her sweeping the walkway in front of the community center during a drill, hands moving with a scrubbing rhythm that felt like penance. A kid from the cul-de-sac ran past her with a grin, and she offered him a water bottle without the gaze that said she was counting the sacrifice. It was a small thing, and maybe it's unfair to call it repentance, but it was real. She told me once, in a voice that had finally lost its edge, that it was the strangest feeling to realize the rules were not a net that would always catch you. She had believed that if she enforced the covenant strictly enough, she could control the outcomes, keep chaos at bay. But life, that stubborn improviser, kept offering new variations. I wanted to keep everyone safe, she said, and I could see maybe she believed it. But I forgot that safety isn't about fencing people into the right behavior. It's about helping when they're in trouble. It was the sort of confession that is small and human and messy, the kind people give when they discover that their hands have been used for something other than just pointing. She volunteered to be the drill coordinator and started learning the layout of hydrants, the gating numbers that mean nothing until they mean everything. She learned to walk with us to a truck and accept that the world sometimes needed brute force as well as rulebooks. People forgave for different reasons, some because it was their nature, some because they had an interest in keeping the neighborhood peaceful, some because they had seen the woman who had watched us struggle now volunteering her time, and maybe because life was too short for petty scores. Forgiveness isn't a single thing. It's a folding of a map until the creases line up well enough for the next trip. There are days when I still think about that night, not because of the fine or the checklist, but because it taught me about how fragile control can be. Karen's minivan could have been the reason we couldn't get a ladder up in time. She could have watched a different ending. She could have insisted on rules as a reason to do nothing. Instead, she learned that's not always the case. People don't always change. But sometimes the shape of a lesson is enough to bend a person. I've been at enough scenes to know that the world is a collection of small miracles and dumb tragedies, a ledger that rarely balances. We wash out hoses and repaint bumpers and go home smelling of smoke, and then we show up again when the call comes in. We don't keep score in the way people think we do. We know the names of the houses more by their creaks and porches than by legal descriptions. We know that a neighbor's stubbornness is a living thing, and that it can be redirected like water if you're patient and persistent. If there was one thing that night taught the whole neighborhood, it was this: rules matter, but so does mercy. A covenant won't breathe life into someone trapped on a balcony. A fine won't stop a fire from starting. There are moments when the geometry of order collapses and all the things that matter are hands and hoses and the person who chooses to move their car. I don't care how many meetings she had to attend or how many forms she filled out. The real change was watching someone step out from behind a folder and into the messy, inefficient business of helping. Maybe that's what the HOA should be about in the first place, not policing, but protecting. Some nights I drive past that cul-de-sac on my way home. The houses sit quiet. The mailbox is lean. Kids still race their bikes in imperfect circles. Sometimes I see her pruning a hedge, sleeves rolled up, face turned toward the sun in a way that looks like she's finally learned to accept warmth without needing to measure it first. If there's a moral, it's not a tidy one. It isn't that she was punished and therefore redeemed. Those things don't come in neat pairs. What happened was uglier and gentler than that. It was a night where the world reminded us all how small we are and how quickly the rules we build can be overtaken by heat and smoke and the sudden need for courage that doesn't consult a list. And when I'm called back to that cul-de-sac again, because the work we do is patient and repeating, I see less scorn and more people who've practiced shouting someone else's name and then running toward them. That, in the end, is the only kind of HOA I care about, a neighborhood that knows the difference between a covenant and a life. In the months that followed, the neighborhood changed in small, stubborn ways that mattered more than any new covenant. Volunteers painted reflective markers on curbs and taped laminated hydrant locations to mailbox posts. The HOA funded a tiny safety kiosk near the community center, and the elderly couple 2 houses down hosted a pancake breakfast that doubled as a safety fair. Kids learned how to stop, drop, and roll with solemn faces, then laughed as they raced back to practice holding a hose and pretending to be firefighters, their seriousness punctuated by giggles. People volunteered for a neighborhood contact list and agreed to check in during storms. They practiced evacuating the dark and carrying one another's little things out: medications, a family photo, the cat in its carrier. Karen surprised some by coordinating a map of escape routes and marking the best places to park that would avoid future obstructions. She still carried a clipboard, but sometimes she used it to tally volunteers instead of fines. Not everyone softened. There are always those who clutch a rule like a talisman, but many of us learned to balance order with empathy. The work of safety, we discovered, was less about enforcement and more about readiness and neighborliness. We rebuilt a house, yes, and we repainted fences, but what felt like the truest repair was the way people began to show up for each other without waiting for permission. A year later, on a bright afternoon with folding chairs and paper plates, the rebuilt family invited the block to celebrate. Karen brought trifle and a nervous smile. She spoke briefly about the importance of clear lanes and quick responses. Then she thanked the firefighters.